I'm replacing this guy today. '94 Skyline GTST. I have a bad brake master cylinder in here. We're going to replace it with this brand new brake master cylinder. This is a BM47. The one I'm going to replace it with is a BM50. So the bore is slightly bigger in this guy. And so I should have a little firmer brake feel because you're pumping more fluid per brake pedal application. But I'm not replacing that because of the brake feel. I'm replacing that because that's failed. So how do you know your brake master cylinder failed and you need to replace it? So probably the most common failure I've seen on brake master cylinders is an external leak. And you can tell there's an external leak if you look right underneath at the brake booster. And what you'll see on the brake booster is you'll either see it wet or you'll see that it looks like the paint is getting eaten away. And if we look at the brake master cylinder, the paint getting eaten away will look like it's dripping down. And why that happens is because a seal inside the brake master cylinder failed and now brake fluid's coming out externally and now there's an external leak. You can see this brake master cylinder has an integrated reservoir. There's seals right here. Sometimes you can just replace the reservoir and sometimes you can just replace the seals in these guys. Other times this is a one-piece unit or they don't sell parts separately and you would have to replace this entire thing if you couldn't get these parts separate. Alright, here we are driving along and we hit the brakes. What are some symptoms that would tell me the brake master cylinder is bad? So let's say I'm driving along, I hit the brakes and the pedal goes all the way to the floor. Kind of like it did just right now. So there's different chambers inside a brake master cylinder. Sometimes the seal that separates those two chambers can fail. So you're basically pushing fluid from one chamber into the other. And if you verify there's no external leaks, that's a big clue that the brake master cylinder could have a failure. So here's another one I have in this particular car. No matter what, the pedal's always low and hard. I verified all my brake components work, nothing seized up, and there's no leaks. So this could point me to the brake master cylinder if I verified the rest of the system's okay. Another thing which I discovered recently, on rapid application, the brake pedal feels good, but if you slowly press the brake pedal and it goes all the way to the floor, kind of like it is right now, and again you verified there's no leaks or issues in the entire rest of the system, that's a good indicator that the brake master cylinder has failed. I would always double check under the dash as well. Is all that linkage still there? Is anything loose? Is anything missing? Is anything bent or broken? Being an ex-Subaru tech, I know some models either like the spot welds where the pedal assembly bolts up to the chassis would fail and the pedal assembly would either not work correctly and then you'd get weird issues with the brake and clutch pedal, which could maybe trick you into thinking there's actually a problem in the actual brake or clutch system. So I do some research on your particular chassis if there's any weird common failures like that. But yeah, in this car I constantly have a low hard pedal. When I slowly push down on the brake pedal, I can make it go all the way to the floor. This is also a 26-year-old car by now. It looks like that's the original brake master cylinder. All these things together make it really conclusive for me that I have a brake master cylinder failure. So yeah, why don't we get to replacing that thing? Alright, so the first thing I'm going to do, I have some rust penetrant. And with the rust penetrant, I am going to spray both brake fittings. Plus there's two nuts that hold the brake master cylinder to the brake booster. I think no matter what age of car I will do that, because the last thing you want to do is break off that stud or break off that brake line fitting. And after I sprayed the rust penetrant and went to go walk my dog to let the penetrant do its job, I'll get my fluid evacuator and I will suck out as much of the fluid as I can out of this master cylinder. And I'm going to do that because once I crack open these lines, I want as little fluid as possible to spill out of these lines because brake fluid will for sure damage paint. After I suck this out, I am going to grab a flare wrench. Always flare fitting wrench on these type of hydraulic fittings because these things strip out really easy if you just put an open end wrench on that thing. And then it may not be so intuitive, but you're not fitting a box wrench over that line. I'm going to use my pump fluid evacuator to suck as much fluid as I can out of here. You guys who don't have these, you can also go to the grocery store, get a turkey baster, and suck as much out as possible. Sometimes I'll get a paper towel in there to get as much out as I can as well, because again, you don't want it to spill out of the two ports and onto your paint. Alright, you can see there's little cavities in there that I'll stick or alternate my hose into, because sometimes there's like different chambers in this guy, and again, trying to suck as much out of this as I can. So let us continue the suck. Sounds like we're empty, so I'm gonna put my cap and strainer back on, so when I remove this, whatever residual doesn't spill out. I'm gonna crack open these two lines with my flare wrench, and then remove and then loosen the two bolts holding the brake master to the brake booster. I want to make sure to break these two hydraulic fittings loose first, so that I have a little bit of leverage. This guy is still secure. If I loosened the two mounting nuts first, this would be like flopping all over the place, and I'd risk damaging these fittings or damaging the lines while I had to hold this guy at the same time. So break these two loose first. So I have these two broken loose. Now it's okay for me to remove the two mounting nuts. Alright, got these nuts off. I got brake clean and a towel. I'm just gonna spray some brake clean and wipe these down a little bit just to get some of that grime off, so that when I take these fittings off, I'm not sliding the grime around or sliding it back and getting it stuck in the fitting, reducing the possibility of contamination. I can feel that I can unthread these by hand. I'll grab a bunch of towels and put them under these fittings, because no matter what, a little bit of fluid is going to leak out. This is especially important if you have any sort of painted surface that this brake fluid is going to land on. So both of these are unthreaded. I'm going to move these lines, and this guy should slide out towards the camera. Alright, so the ports are this way. Why am I tilting it this way? Because I don't want the brake fluid to fall out of the ports. I got a bucket right next to me. I'm going to put this in my bucket port side down to let this drain out, so that if you got a core, the parts guy is not going to be pissed off at you because it's full of brake fluid. Before I install the new brake master cylinder, I'll get something to clean this surface, because you also want this surface clean. If I saw that there was any damage inside here from the brake fluid, sometimes that the master cylinder will leak so bad that the brake booster will actually get damaged from all the brake fluid going in there. Now would be the time to take a good look inside if there's any sort of like fluid contamination or rust, and hopefully everything's all good, so you do not have to replace the brake booster as well. So I'm gonna clean that up, and then we'll go to the bench. Alright, I got my brake master off, and I found something I did not expect. You can see the paint actually got eaten away, and then hopefully you guys can see that rust or that paint getting eaten away towards the bottom that I was talking about. So it looks like the master cylinder on this car actually had a seal failure, and fluid was escaping towards the back. So before I do anything, I'm gonna soak a paper towel in water and just dab all these areas, because brake fluid's hygroscopic, which means it absorbs water. So in order to prevent the paint damage from spreading further, you want to use water to neutralize all this brake fluid. So another pro tip, every time you do this, you should actually be checking the brake booster push rod adjustment with a tool like this. This is the brake booster push rod, and this actually has a length that you need to set, and with variations in brake boosters and brake master cylinders, every time you replace a booster or master cylinder, you should be always double checking the brake booster push rod length. I will link my video in the description below. I'll be honest, 99% of the time nobody does this, but 100% of the time you should be doing this. Alright, so in this instance there's a gap. So that means that my brake booster push rod is too long for this brake master cylinder, and that means my brakes would have stayed partially engaged at all times. So again, why it's so important, brake booster push rod length adjustment. Alright, just took a brass wire brush to these fittings. I'll spray brake clean and I'll roll these around because sometimes grit gets trapped in between the fitting and the line, and I want all that grit out of there. So spraying and rolling these will help get the grit out. Really important, you want the flares to be as clean as possible. You can see this brake line has this like coating on it, and I've had in the past that coating will flake off right here and get stuck in between the sealing surface, and then I'll go road test and I constantly get like a weep of brake fluid. What happens is a little bit of this coating goes in between the sealing surface of this and the brake master, and then it'll cause a leak. So grab that brake clean and then a paper towel and make sure that these sealing surfaces are totally clean. Alright, it seems like another thing that's really misunderstood. Bench bleeding a brake master cylinder on the bench. I have my brake master chucked up in my vise. I grabbed onto one of the ears. You should actually get some soft jaws so you don't damage the ears, but you want to grab a mounting portion like this. Don't grab the body. You can actually damage the body if you squeeze it this way. Alright, let's check out my setup. So I just have a couple of spare brake lines and fittings, some vacuum tubing, and then I filled up my reservoir with brake fluid. And what you're trying to do is bleed out all of the air in the brake master cylinder, because if you install a brake master cylinder without bench bleeding it first, there's going to be air pockets and you're never going to get all the air out of this guy. So how do we do this? I have an extension. I'm going to put this in the butthole of my brake master cylinder and slowly push. And you see those air bubbles come out, and slowly retract. And what we're doing is pushing the air out of the brake master cylinder, and when we retract that piston, these two lines suck fresh, unaerated fluid. You don't want to rapidly do this because you're just gonna churn up air bubbles in there. So it's a slow in and slow out. During the whole process, you can actually use your extension and just lightly tap all around, and that really helps if there's like a trapped air pocket to break up the air bubble in there. So I'm going to continue to do this, and then I'm going to continue to do this, and then once I can see that there's no more air bubbles in here, we'll be ready to install this guy. Sometimes the brake fluid gets aerated up in here too, so you can even tap this guy to break up some of the air bubbles. Alright, and make sure this stays topped off also. You don't want to just be sucking in air. Alright, so that took a long ass time, so don't be surprised if it takes a long ass time. But again, you know you're done when you press in the bore and you see no more air bubbles come out. We're ready to install this, and this is the part that I absolutely hate because it's usually a mess. So very quickly, I'm going to undo one line at a time. In the packaging, these usually come with some plugs, so I'm going to undo that, put a plug in, undo that, put the other plug in. Go into the car and try to get the car lines on as fast as I can and just snug down with my fingers so the fluid doesn't leak out all over the car. Once I have these snug, I'm going to permanently put the mounting bolts in and then do a final tightening of these. So we'll come back when these lines are in. Put the cap on before you install this. I've done that before. Blech. Cap that ass up. Alright, we got our brake master cylinder installed. I flicked out that cap, put in a line, flicked out the other cap, put in a line. Once I had these finger tight, I installed these two mounting nuts for the final time, and then finally tightened these down with my flare wrench, and then cleaned up everybody. One more important step before we go road test. I'm going to sit in the car and press the brake pedal. What do I feel? Press a few times. Does the pedal go to the floor? Is it abnormally soft? I'm gonna hold it. Does the pedal sink? Oh, looks like it holds, so why don't we go take a look. Oh, so far so good. One other cool trick I like to use to make sure the lines aren't leaking. I really like tissue paper, not only to wipe my butt, but because it shows fluid leaks really well. So fluid leak is always going to leak towards the bottom, so I'm going to just take my tissue paper and touch the bottom of these fittings. You could see that's just a little bit of dirt, but if my fittings were leaking after I held it down, you would have saw like wet spots. So why don't we just do that test one more time. And you could see pretty much my tissue paper is dry, so our fitting should be good. This would let me know I'm okay to road test. I'm gonna drive this car and still have brakes. So after you road test, I would do the tissue paper test one more time, verify that these are not leaking. From here you should actually bleed the brake system as you normally would. Open up the bleeder valves and bleed the brakes. And yeah, solid brake pedal is definitely one of my favorite things in life. I hope I helped you get there.